A game that we all had circled on our NFL schedule calendars. The Raiders, the Saints, the Raiders versus Derek Carr might not have the same appeal as we thought it was going to. But we'll break it all down on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for Thursday, December 26, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome here, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you. If you're catching us wherever you find your favorite podcast, that's great. Again, we appreciate that. If you're checking us out on YouTube, we appreciate that as well. Thanks so much for the support of the show, even in a season that's been bad. 3-12 on the season so far for the record for the Raiders, only with 2 of these bad boys left to go. The support of the show has been consistent all year long from you, Raider Nation, so we thank you for that. We also thank my man Ari for the great job he's done behind the scenes on the YouTube page, making it possible that we have the page there. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit him up, shout him out, as I do each and every day. You can hit me up on Twitter as well, at your boy Q254. And if you ever want to be a part of the show, you can always hit up the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. We won't have any calls or texts on today's show. It is crossover Thursday, so no calls or texts till tomorrow as we close out the week really strong, get you ready for Week 17 action, Raiders and Saints. But we're going to do that in its entirety today as Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, and myself will talk all things offensive and defensive storylines for both teams, what's gone right and what's gone wrong, and for both teams, a lot of wrong this 2024 season. So we'll do that, and we'll talk about how either one of these teams could come up with a victory. We'll do that coming up in segment number 3. So the crossover edition, we do it each and every Thursday throughout the course of the regular season. If you're brand new to the show, it is all good. Another Locked On host joins the show, and again, we just compare and contrast. And today, Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints. He does a fantastic job. Really a fun show that we actually recorded a little bit earlier in the week because of the Christmas holiday. So we wanted to make sure that you had what you were supposed to have, which is a good show on the day after Christmas on this crossover Thursday. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Prize Picks. Download the app, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Hopefully everyone had a really good Christmas day, safe, depending on what you do as far as celebrating it. If you do or you don't, whatever the case may be, hopefully everyone had a safe and fun time with their family. And if they got a little bit of time off, that's great. Definitely appreciate it when you can get it. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. Let's get into segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Ross Jackson, host of Locked On Saints, and myself talking all things Raiders, as the Raiders are the away team. So we're going to lead things off. We're going to get our Ricky Henderson on, right? Offense and defensive storylines for the Silver and Black here in segment number 1.
2 teams limping to the offseason. No playoffs in sight for either of these matchups, but certainly a lot to prove in this game, I imagine, for both sides of the football.
I'll tell you this, man. This is a game that really looked like a sexy matchup when the schedule was released.
For
right?
real. It's a whole different outlook now, baby.
Yeah, it was like New Orleans, the end of the year. It's right around New Year's.
Yeah.
Derek Carr, the Raiders, Foster Morrow, like it was so much hype and excitement about this one. Now it's like, well, these 2 teams are just trying to get to the finish line and get to the offseason.
Yeah, that's it, man. That
wild,
is
man, how
it.
seasons change, right? Right before your eyes. It's just that's how the NFL goes. But yeah,
absolutely, man.
It's going to be fun anyway. I mean, again, because there are storylines in this one. Obviously, the Raiders are trying to figure out who they are, and it's a shame that it's Week 17 and they're still trying to figure it out. But offensively, they've gone through a carousel of quarterbacks, and to be honest, they've gone through a quarterback carousel since Derek Carr was let go, right? Removed on from and ended up in New Orleans. They've had a carousel quarterback. So Aiden O'Connell, again, is getting his opportunity. He looked like he was lost for the season back in Week 14 when he left the game against Tampa Bay on a cart in an air cast, and he only ended up missing one game, the Falcons Monday night game, and he returned last week on Sunday against the Jaguars. So he's going to get another start to try to prove who he can be, if he could be the franchise quarterback. I think most people have doubts that he could actually be that guy. But Ross, when you have the film out there to prove what you are or what you're not, that's kind of how you solidify it. So there's a big game, the next 2 games, obviously, for Aiden O'Connell, just to kind of give himself a chance at potentially being that franchise quarterback moving forward.
Yeah, the Saints have a very similar situation here. Of course, Derek Carr is dealing with an injury right now, a left hand injury when he tried to dive and pick up a first down on second down up against the New York Giants in a game that they were already winning. But, look, go out there and play your heart out, I guess, leave everything out on the field. But the Saints are now in a situation to where they're doing something similar with Spencer Rattler, trying to figure out if he could potentially be their future guy. So, what are some of the things that you're looking for when it comes to Aiden O'Connell up against this New Orleans Saints defense in this matchup that could potentially prove positive that Aiden O'Connell could be that guy for the future in Las Vegas?
Well, he's really comfortable in Scott Turner, who's the interim offensive coordinator. He's really comfortable in his offense. I feel like Scott Turner has really found a quarterback that fits with what he wants to do, get the ball out of his hands really quickly. But for me, what I really want to see from Aiden O'Connell is not just necessarily go to the first read all the time. Like sometimes allow a play to develop a little bit more, right? It seems like a lot of his passes are either right to the first read or it's to a check down. Right. It's not like, okay, the first read's not there. All right, maybe let's go through the progressions and see. Maybe we can even have a bigger play. Like there was multiple times against the Jaguars where I saw Jacoby Myers running open, and instead it was like, all right, here's a check down to Amir Abdullah. My first read, Brock Bowers isn't there. Let me go to Amir Abdullah. No, just go through your progressions because other guys are breaking open. But it feels like he doesn't trust either the offensive line. Maybe he doesn't trust himself. He doesn't want to take a sack. He doesn't want to get hit. Whatever the case may be, I'd like to see him go through the progressions. I'd like to see him trust his O-line in front of him and just see how things develop. And, the playmakers obviously are Brock Bowers. We'll talk a lot about him. Jacoby Myers is another playmaker. Big Michael Mayer, he's another playmaker that was just drafted in the second round a year ago out of Notre Dame. He's fantastic. And even Trey Tucker, who has speed, he can hit the deep shot. But, again, you've got to allow those plays to develop. So a lot of times with Aiden, he's just, all right, my first read's there. Boom, I'm going to deliver it. Oh, my first read's not there. Check down. That's what you don't want to see. And this is not a disrespect or a shot at Derek Carr, but I think we saw 9 seasons of Derek Carr checking the ball down a lot because he wanted to pick up something, which I respect that. You want to pick up something, but sometimes, man, you got to allow that play to develop. You got to go through your progressions and hit the guy that could be breaking open that you can either hit while he's breaking open or you can even throw him open. That's what separates, the good quarterbacks from the great quarterbacks. Great quarterbacks can throw guys open. Good quarterbacks wait for them to be open.
Oh, that's such a big thing. Spot throws, all that. Look, risk aversion was such a big part of the conversation around Derek Carr following his first year. Kind of cleaned some of that up, got a little bit more aggressive in offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak's offense in the early goings of the season. But then, of course, the injuries set in and everything just kind of went downhill from there, very quickly here in the Big Easy. Looking over on the defensive side, I think you got another guy that a lot of Louisiana sports fans will be familiar with that's also looking to prove something and prove he can be a part of the fabric of this team moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt, because the fact that the Raiders defense and really the team in general is the walk-in wounded. The defense doesn't have Max Crosby. The defense doesn't have Christian Wilkins, the big fella in the middle. They don't have Malcolm Kuntz. He never made it to the season. He tore his ACL. But they do have this guy that I think everyone in the New Orleans area is very familiar with, K'Lavon Chaisson, former first-round pick of Jacksonville. Jacksonville waived him, and Tom Telesco, the Raiders GM, picked him up off of waivers. And Russ, he has 4 sacks so far in 13 games this season with the Raiders. He has a pass block and a pass interception all in the same play. He tipped it up while he's falling to the ground. He intercepts it. That was against Tampa Bay Week 14. And look, in Jacksonville, he never had more than 3 sacks in a season. In one season, he never had more than 3. He's got 4 with the Raiders. It's something about the Raiders organization and what Patrick Graham as a defensive coordinator is doing that is making him comfortable. And he told me in the locker room following the game against Jacksonville on Sunday, I would like to see Vegas be my home, right? He's in the last year of his deal. It's contract year. He obviously was picked up off of waivers, so he's going to be a free agent. He wants to have a long-term solution, a long-term home in Vegas with the Raiders. Obviously, that's something for the offseason, but he's out there getting after it. And with no Max Crosby, you would think that, hey, it's going to be tough sledding out there. But he is actually filling the void of really Tyree Wilson, who was a former first-round pick that hasn't turned into what the Raiders were expecting him to. He's coming along, but he's coming along slowly. All of a sudden, Chaisson is stepping up. He's making plays. He always has a smile on his face. He's a guy that I really enjoy watching. I want to see how he finishes this season really strong and how he makes a case for himself. Like, hey, Tom Telesco, I'm here. You can sign me, right? I'm comfortable. I could run across from Max Crosby. We could be a really good 1-2 punch. I think he's making a case for himself, and Raider Nation is really starting to find that guy that they're somewhat falling in love with. He might have been a diamond in the rough that Telesco came up with.
That's going to be big to watch in this game, too. The Saints are expected to be without starting center Eric McCoy potentially for the remaining 2 games of the season, as well as left guard. I know they're on the interior, but Eric McCoy's one of the best at IDing and letting his quarterback know here's where the pressure is coming from. So that could potentially play right into Caleb Von Chason's kind of MO there as he gets into this. We're into evaluation season, I think, for both of these teams. And Chason's definitely one of those guys that has a real opportunity. And there's some guys for the New Orleans Saints that have a real opportunity as well, but not before a couple of stars potentially try to get their way back to the game. We thought this was going to be a Derek Carr revenge game. He's out with injury, but it sounds like he's interested in making that a reality again. Let's get to that as we continue on with this crossover Thursday edition of Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All things silver and black right there. All things offense and defense. What's gone right, what's gone wrong for the Raiders. We'll flip things over. We'll talk about the home team, the New Orleans Saints. We'll do that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. That's coming up next. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors here on the show, and that's Rocket Money. Has Rocket Money ever helped you find any subscriptions that you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? Well, that's happened, and that's happened to a lot of people. They've had subscriptions that they didn't even realize that they were still paying for, and Rocket Money has made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place. It could be subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this upcoming year in 2025. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of over $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to about $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. So, what do you got to do? Well, if you want to cancel your unwanted subscriptions to reach your financial goals, do it faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, crossover Thursday edition, Saints Raiders Week 17, a game that had a lot more intrigue when the schedule came out. We're like, man, when's the Saints coming up? Oh, there it is. Oh, it's in New Orleans late in the season? Great, right? It's going to be fantastic right around the New Year's. That'll be fun. Not so much, as both of these teams have underwhelmed. And, of course, the big headline storyline, will Derek Carr play? Will he not play? Well, we'll answer that question and more, or at least try to attempt to answer that question and more as we jump into segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, the crossover edition. Ross Jackson and myself talking all things offense and defensive storylines when it comes to the New Orleans Saints.
The New Orleans Saints have been without their starting quarterback, Derek Carr, for a few games now since they played the New York Giants in New York just a couple of weeks ago, and have turned to rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler in the meanwhile. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to see Derek Carr on the field against his old team, the Las Vegas Raiders, because he is fighting his tail off to get back out there. I know he's not the only revenge game player that we're watching out for. A lot of former Raiders in that New Orleans Saints locker room and on staff, but you have to imagine that there's an extra motivation for Derek Carr specifically to get back for this game.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, DC is one of those guys that will try to downplay it all week long. And, maybe because he's not 100% healthy yet, maybe he doesn't have to speak as much, but he'll try to say, it's just another game. It's important. I want to go out there and put my team in the best position to win. But deep down inside, as everybody does, right? I mean, you always want to flex on your ex a little bit, right? So I know Derek Carr enough to know that he definitely wants to try to flex on the ex a little bit. And so I'm sure that he's going to have a good time and really work his tail off, as you mentioned, to get back into this into action and be able to start in this game, especially at the crib too, at home.
Yeah.
So he has the home crowd behind him. He's definitely going to feel good about himself going into that game. He's going to definitely want to take advantage.
Yeah, I got to tell you, man, if I was ousted by this podcast network and I had to go to another podcast network, and then I had a situation where somebody was inviting me on a locked on show, but I lost my voice, you better believe I'm drinking all the tea. I'm squeezing all the lemons. I'm down in all the honey. I'm coming through on that podcast, and I'm letting them know you should have never let me go. Now, of course, I'm not going anywhere here at Locked
Oh,
On, and neither
no.
is Q, but goodness gracious, would I be trying to make sure that I came back and showed everybody what they were missing out on. And I think that's exactly where DC is as well.
There's no doubt. And, Ross, really thinking about this offense, whether it's Derek Carr, thinking about Spencer Rattler or whoever is behind center, there was, a couple weeks where it's like Clint Kubiak is the hottest thing cooking. Clint Kubiak's going to be a head coach in 2025. Man, they're going to have to find a replacement for him. I know Raider Nation was like, man, they should have hired him as the OC. See, should have got him first before New Orleans. Clearly, that's tailed off. But what was really the biggest reason? Why is that tailed off? Was it injury? Was it more than that? What's really kind of the math behind what happened with Clint Kubiak and this phenomenal offense that they had the first few weeks?
Yeah. New Orleans Saints fans don't want to acknowledge it. They hate to acknowledge it. I personally don't like to acknowledge it either, because the Saints will tell you that they don't want to acknowledge it. But I do think that the injuries have had a major impact. But I do have other things too from a schematic standpoint. And if we're honest, all this kind of still falls back to the limitation that this offense has had without its top stars. No Rashid Shaheed, no Chris Olave at the wide receiver spot. Taysom Hill, of course, was a big part of that. He was in and out of the game plan, in and out of the availability conversation throughout the season. Of course, his season came to an end against the Los Angeles Rams a few weeks ago. But I do think that a big part of it too was a lack of a counterpunch, Q, for this offense. This offense wants to be able to establish itself on the ground game, right? That's what they want to do. It's a wide zone offense. It's what every offense wants to do in the NFL. But the good offenses in the league have a second punch. Every major fighter had a second punch, a third punch. This is not a Muhammad Ali. This is not a Mike Tyson like it looked like in the first 2 weeks. This is a team that lacks that second punch. And so I think that their lack of ability to be able to pivot away and still be able to produce is what's limited them the most when it comes to what this season turned into versus what it started out looking like.
Yeah, man, it started out looking fantastic, right? I mean,
Ooh.
points. Everybody was scoring points. I mean, New Orleans was the hottest thing cooking. It's like, man, Clint Kubiak, he's going to have his pick of jobs in 2025, and clearly that has tailed off just a little bit, or quite a bit, I would say. I mean, look, both these teams, as we both talked about, are looking for the offseason, trying to limp to the finish line, and both teams are riddled with injuries. Cam Jordan is your guy. He's the the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the Saints. I love what he's doing, even in year 14. Seems like that he's always happy. Similar to what I was saying about Chason in segment number 1, we were talking about the Raiders. He seems like he's always playing with a smile on his face. Cam Jordan looks like he always has a smile on his face. What is it about that dude that makes him tick, and how revved up is he going to be to go on Sunday?
Yeah, I think he's going to be really, really excited, especially after this last game. You have seen his snap percentage tick up since Dennis Allen was fired. Former Las Vegas Raiders head coach, of course, or former Raiders head coach, of course, was fired in week 9. You saw his snaps go from around 41% Q up to about 54 or so percent. And he was rewarding the team with, he had a multi-sack game, his first 2-sack game in about a year or so last week up against the Washington Commanders, where they got to Jaden Daniels, the expected rookie of the year, 8 times in that matchup. But in this last game in Green Bay at Lambeau, you kind of saw his snaps come back down a little bit, and then you saw that defensive line continue to struggle. So I think that he's going to be ready and raring to go in this one. I think that there's the Derek Carr conversation of the revenge game. There's the Foster Moreau conversation of the revenge game, but there's also all the guys that give a crap about those guys that also want to rise to the occasion and kind of get a charge from what that revenge game could look like. And so I think Cam Jordan's absolutely one of those who's always looking for the additional motivation to go out there. And coming off of a 34-0 shutout on Monday Night Football on national television, these guys are, and I'll borrow what Cam Jordan would usually say. Well, I won't borrow exactly what he would usually say, but let's just say they're pretty mad. All right. They're a little ticked off. Right. We'll say it that way. We'll keep it family friendly in case anybody's listening at Christmas dinner here, or day after Christmas dinner here. But I think that absolutely there's some of that. And I think the thing that makes him tick is how much he loves the game. And I think you saw that from some of the best. You saw that from Cam Newton all the time, smile on his face. Jameis Winston, not always most reliable guy, but always happy because of how much he loved the game of football. I think Cam Jordan's got a lot of that as well.
You know, what we saw on Monday night, and of course, Saint fans don't want to think about it as it was the first shutout in all season, right? It took
All
16 weeks to
season.
get a
Yep.
shutout, but that's what it was. It felt like to me, Ross, that game was over after the first drive. Josh Jacobs, former Raider, touched the ball.
Yep.
I don't know how many times, but he had his way, either catching the ball, running the ball, stiff arming folks. I mean, he was just doing whatever he wanted to do. The Raiders don't have a great run game. Don't get me wrong. And I know Antonio Pierce wants to run the ball, but he doesn't have a great a running offense. They just don't. They just have struggled to be a consistently good running team. But what is it that has been the biggest struggle for the Saints defense when it comes to trying to stop the run?
It's definitely been yards before contact. That has been huge for this team. I think that they're in the top 5 when it comes to yards before contact per attempt allowed. And so basically when Q and I are talking about yards before contact, what we're discussing is the amount of yards that a running back can pick up before somebody comes in contact with them from the defensive side of the football. Josh Jacobs is a guy that has the most rushing yards in the first quarter of any back across the entire NFL, and the Saints, still knowing that they needed to key in on that, were not able to stop him despite that. So it's one of those situations where you know where the ball's going, but you still couldn't get it done. So I think that yards before contact is a part of that. The reason why the Saints struggle there more specifically is because they simply get moved off the line. They lose the line of scrimmage on defense. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. They just don't have the anchor to control that line of scrimmage, Q. And I think that that's what ends up causing them so much grief in the run game. And that's why I think the last 2 games of the season, a lot of these players are out there trying to perform for jobs, right? We talked about evaluation season earlier.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
A lot of these players are on notice. They're
Yeah.
playing for their jobs here. There are some exceptions to that. Of course, some of the young guys, some of the older veteran guys, but some of the guys that haven't been around for very long, especially with an upcoming head coach change happening here in New Orleans, there's going to be a lot of these players that are out there with something to prove on Sunday. So hopefully you see them be able to do that. But they've got to start winning that line of scrimmage over in the defensive line. If they can't do that, they're going to end up in a ton of trouble. And we're going to dive into all the other things that each of these teams needs to do in order to make sure they don't end up in a ton of trouble as we get to what each team needs to do to get a victory. And I'm going to tell you why Brock Bowers is the guy that terrifies me the most looking at this matchup for the New Orleans Saints defense. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with this Locked On Raiders, Locked On Saints crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All things Saints, and there's no doubt about it that Derek Carr is going to do everything he can to get out there. Not guaranteeing that he's going to go. And even if he does go, he's obviously not going to be 100%. So who knows what kind of version of DC we may see. But that'll be another storyline to pay attention to in the game. And of course, you're always going to be looking for things to pay attention to when your team is not a team that's going to go to the playoffs. I'm always going to lock in anyway, just because it's, the Raiders and it's football and I'm going to watch. But you just kind of know what it is when it's the end of the season. 2 teams, as Ross has said and I've said, both just trying to get to the finish line, get into the offseason, and try to put this bad boy back together. But one of these teams has to win, right? So what is it going to take for the Saints? What is it going to take for the Raiders to come up with the dub? We'll talk about that coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get into that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the show, which is FanDuel. And we know the NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's okay. It's never too late to get in on regular season action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up that dub. You could pick on players that score a touchdown, how many points each team will score. You could bet the over. You could bet the under. Whatever the case may be, FanDuel has got you covered. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Right now, the Raiders are 1.5 favorites on the road versus New Orleans, which tells you a lot more about New Orleans. A lot of reaction to that 34-0 spanking that they took on Monday Night Football to the Green Bay Packers. I'm sure that has a ton to do with it, knowing that there's so many injuries that the team is dealing with. Both teams are dealing with. But, yeah, the Raiders are 1.5 favorite on the road for Sunday. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints, and of course myself from Locked On Raiders, doing a little crossover edition on this Thursday. One of my favorite shows of the week, each and every week, and there's only a couple more left, right? Today, and then obviously next Thursday, and then that's it. Game, set, match. No more crossover editions. No more season. We'll be officially into the offseason. And boy, oh boy, there'll be plenty to talk about in the offseason, won't there? So we got to appreciate these crossovers while we still have it. Don't forget, it's being brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app, use promo code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. One of these teams has got to win. How are they going to do it? That's what Ross Jackson and myself talk about in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast.
Q, I got to tell you, if there's somebody that terrifies me the most as a matchup for this New Orleans Saints defense, it's absolutely tight end Brock Bowers. The Saints have gotten better against tight ends this season a little bit, but boy, they struggled there big time early, and I think they might struggle again against one of the NFL's best.
Brock Bowers is fantastic. I'll tell you this, man. Ross. He is as advertised and then some. I knew that he was good when the Raiders selected him number 13 overall. I knew that. I mean, just from watching him at Georgia, okay, really good player, cool. That's going to be a good weapon. I didn't know he was 101 catches and over 1,000 yards good, right? I mean, I didn't know he was going to be that, especially with no Devontae Adams. And, oh, by the way, with a carousel of quarterbacks from Gardner Minshew to Aiden O'Connell to Desmond Ridder, back to Aiden O'Connell. Like, he's had so much change and turnover at the quarterback position, and he's over 1,000 yards, over 100 catches, and he's about to break the single season record as far as just receptions by a rookie of Puka Nacua of 105. And he's got 2 games to do it. Like, that's wild. I just don't understand. Wild. I don't understand how he's so good. I mean, I'm not mad. I'm not mad. He's been a bright spot on a bad season, but man, he is fantastic. He is as advertised. Ross, I ask every single person that we talk to on these crossovers, and they're fantastic each and every week. What is the plan? How do you try to slow down that dude named Brock Bowers?
Well, thank goodness the New Orleans Saints play in New Orleans, because they need to bury a gree somewhere. They need some voodoo dolls. They need to cook up something, because they're going to need something otherworldly to stop this guy. I guess the thing that you're really looking for is, can the matchup with a guy like Demario Davis, can he end up rising to the occasion to limit a little bit of what he does, help to take some of it away? But even then, look, Brock Bowers is going to outsize a guy like Tyrann Mathieu, as scrappy as Tyrann Mathieu is. That's not going to work. If you look at Pete Werner, the speed difference, the athleticism difference, that's going to end up kind of edging things over towards Brock Bowers. That's going to be a really, really tough thing for the New Orleans Saints to stop. So honestly, the biggest and best way to stop Brock Bowers is to keep Aiden O'Connell from getting the ball out of his hands. And so you got to hound him with pressure over on the defensive side, make him make some bad decisions, force him to move off, or look for that check down because he feels the pressure. That's the only way I can think of to keep that ball out of Brock Bowers' hands, and all the yards after catch that he picks up against one of the worst yards after catch defenses in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, 11 catches, 99 yards is what he went for on Sunday against the Jaguars. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, again, 11 catches, and they're going to make sure he gets enough targets to break that record and then some. I mean, obviously you saw a very big effort to feed him on Sunday versus Jacksonville, and they've got 2 more games to get it done. Yeah, he's going to get a ton of targets. Well, so when you look at the Saints, though, and you look at their offense, who would you say is the difference maker as far as the playmaker? Who is their Brock Bowers? Not saying it's the same guy, but who is the guy that can help break the back of a defense?
Honestly, I don't know that they have that guy right now, Q, because it used to be Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah.
You would probably put, the deep threat wide receiver. He was the guy that was, 80 yards, 75 yards, 63 yards. He could house it from anywhere on the field. Chris Olave was that guy too. Both those guys are done for the season. Although Chris Olave did return to practice this past week, I don't expect that he'll be back after taking a really scary hit week 9 up against the Carolina Panthers. 2 confirmed concussions this season, was checked for an additional one as well. Has like 5 in his NFL or 5 in his career, including college and stuff like that. So they're going to probably take it easy with him. So really the guy that's the most reliable is the question that you have to ask. And the most reliable guy is Foster Moreau. And as you know, Foster Moreau can go out there and make some plays for you, but he's not going to be a game-breaking presence for you. So maybe the Saints are able to get Alvin Kamara back out on the field. He was in the head coach's office. Interim head coach Darren Rizzi told us on Tuesday via conference call that Alvin Kamara was in his office Tuesday morning saying, I want to come back. I want to be back on the field after suffering a groin injury in their loss to the Washington Commanders just a couple weeks ago. So that's going to be maybe the guy to watch. This is a dude that scored 4 or 5 touchdowns up against the Dallas Cowboys earlier this season in week 2. He's ready and raring to get back out on the field. He wants to be out there 50 yards away, Q, from his first ever 1,000-yard rushing season. He's never had one.
Wow,
yeah,
that's
crazy, right?
Yeah, that catches me
Very
off guard. Yeah, that is very surprising. And I'll tell you this, Ross. Hell, if he played the Raiders a couple more times, he'd have got 1,000 yards. He always had his way. I'm telling you, he's always had his way with the Raiders. He's had
Yeah, right.
success no matter what he did, catching the ball, running the ball, throwing the ball, like whatever he does. He's like the modern day LaDainian Tomlinson when he's
That's
playing
it.
against the Raiders. So I'm surprised about that 1,000-yard mark. I did not know. I wasn't aware of that. That's a hell of a nugget right there. And yeah, if he's able to go, I would say right there, that's the guy that he's, like I said, he's the backbreaker for the Raiders. It seems like it doesn't matter what year it is, he has his way with them.
Yeah, he's going to be the big name to watch here in New Orleans, maybe even bigger than Derek Carr, right? Because if Derek Carr goes out there, but he doesn't have Alvin Kamara, it's still a very different game. But if Spencer Rattler is under center and they do have Alvin Kamara, or Derek Carr is under center and they do have Alvin Kamara, that changes everything for that team. So as we look at that in terms of the Saints' lack of kind of game breakers on offense, what do you look at as the kind of three most important things that the Raiders have to get done if they do, or even if they don't have that game breaker over in their offensive side?
They've got to just create turnovers, man. They've got to win the turnover battle. I know that sounds really basic, but last week against Jacksonville was the first game all season where they didn't turn the rock over. Like the first game all season where they didn't turn the rock over. And surprise, surprise, they won. Right? I mean, that's what happens if you don't turn the ball over. Jacoby Myers said that in the locker room. We say, hey man, first game you guys didn't turn the ball over. He said, yeah, that's what happens when you don't turn it over. You win games. They have turned the ball over way too much, and they haven't created enough turnovers. They've got the worst turnover differential in the league. They've turned it over way too many times, and they haven't caused enough. Now, to their credit, the last few weeks, they've been able to force some fumbles. Isaiah Polamau, he was able to create 2. He became the AFC Defensive Player of the Week award recipient for being able to do that against Jacksonville, caused those 2 fumbles, and the Raiders recovered. Think about this, Ross. They recovered their first fumble in week 14. That was their first fumble recovery of the season. It took 14 weeks. Like, that's wild to me. That's just that's wild. That's unheard of. I mean, you accidentally come up with a fumble recovery, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But no.
Absolutely.
So turnovers.
Yeah, that's going to be big.
Win the turnover battle, create a couple turnovers, and hold on to the ball. You hold on to the ball, you give yourself a chance to win. I'm not guaranteeing you're going to get a win, but at least you'll give yourself a chance.
Yeah, the New Orleans Saints over the course of the last 6 games have been -4 in turnover differential. That's since Dennis Allen was out and Darren Rizzi has become the interim head coach. The Saints generated 14 turnovers over the course of the first 9 games, and the last 6 they've generated a pair. 2.
Wow.
So they have not been a team anymore that has been forcing those turnovers. So that is going to be big to watch in this one. Yeah, right. That works well for the Raiders key. Big one to watch in this one for sure. Meanwhile, they've turned the ball over 6 times over the course of those 6 games. Not one in each game, but that's certainly where they're averaging. 2 other quick things that I'm watching for New Orleans. If Spencer Rattler is under center, obviously you want to keep the pressure off of him. 52.6% of his dropbacks last week up against the Green Bay Packers were under pressure. You're not going to be able to either get you're not going to be able to get the best out of the kid if he's under pressure like that. You're certainly not going to be able to get an evaluation of him if he's under pressure like that. And I think too, the other thing is that the Saints just simply have to be able to run the football, and maybe for Clint Kubiak's sake, prove that they can do something on offense, even if they're not able to. But Q, I think you and I hit this one on the head. It's got to be about the game breakers, whether having one or not having one, and it's got to be about the turnovers in this game. This should be an old school, and I'm going to use one of my favorite words here from back in I used to love wrestling back in the day. Okay. Needs to be an old school slobber knocker out there between these 2 teams that are kind of limping to the finish line. It needs to feel like a race, but we know it's going to be a limp by the time it's all said and done.
Well, I'm about to say a slobber knocker doesn't sound like it's going to go fast. A slobber knocker sounds like it's slow. A slobber knocker sounds like it's aggressive and physical and mean. And guess what, Ross? I'm here for it. Let's do it.
I'm here for it, man.
It's in the Big Easy too. What could go wrong?
Ain't that the truth? Hey, it's not like they don't have anywhere to go after the game. They'll be fine. Exactly. They'll be fine when it's all said and done.
Exactly.
Well, we appreciate y'all so much for joining us for another fantastic crossover Thursday here. Make sure you go and check out your boy Q over at Locked On Raiders for the Raiders perspective as he wraps up the week, taking a look ahead to this game. You can find more on the Saints over at Locked On Saints every single Monday through Friday with myself, Ross Jackson. For your boy Q, I am Ross Jackson. We'll see you here over on Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints as we continue on throughout the week. Thank you for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer. For your second listen, go and check out another local show, whether it be local to the West Coast, local to New Orleans. Go and support what we've got going on here at the local markets here at the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate you very much for being here. We'll see you again here soon on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
There it is. There it was. Really good stuff with my guy, Ross Jackson. Does a fantastic job. Locked On Saints each and every day. If you want to check out and learn more about New Orleans and continue to get the update on if Derek Carr is going to go, is he not going to go, make sure you head over to his show and check it out. He does a fantastic job. I always endorse the ones that I think are great, and Ross Jackson does a great job each and every day. So big shout out to Ross. Definitely appreciate him making himself available during this week when it was really busy, being a holiday week and, everyone's doing their own thing. But Ross Jackson and myself were able to collaborate, as you heard and saw, on the Locked On Raiders and Locked On Saints crossover edition Week 17 action. We'll close out the week really strong, tell you about what I'll be paying attention to the most coming up in this game on Sunday. We'll do that on Friday. We'll get back to your calls and texts as we close out the week really strong and send you into the weekend the right way and get you ready for, again, Week 17, the Raiders, the Saints, the Big Easy. What can go wrong? We'll do it tomorrow, Raider Nation. So until then, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.